Hello, today we will be talking about teleost diversity. So we have our 5 major lineages of teleosts. We mentioned them in the previous lecture, so maybe the names are a little bit more familiar to you. At least we mentioned the 4 living ones. I guess we didn't talk about the extinct one at all. We don't know that much about the extinct one, but we do have to mention it because it is considered to be a true teleost, and those are the Pholidophoraformes. But we also have our 4 other major groups, our osteoglossomorphas, our alapomorphas, our autocephalomorphas, which are also referred to as the astereoclupiomorphas, and the Euteleostii. So we're going to take each of these groups and just kind of mention the other fish that are within them, and then we'll go through each group kind of in more detail and look at some of the representatives. Your book is based on analyses done in, I believe it was 2006. So there's been more recent analyses done in 2013. By now there's probably been another set done as well. But the 2013 analyses show basically the same thing. They change, I think it's the Amyoformes and Lepiosteoformes, their relationship gets changed a little bit, but pretty much most of the other groups stay the same. So I'll point out some of the changes, but we're not really interested in those. We're interested in kind of the way the book has it set up. So our first major group are the Pholidophoraformes. That's our extinct group. And then after that, we have our subdivision of the osteoglossomorphas. They're made up of the Hyodontiformes and the osteoglossiformes. The next subdivision are the alapomorphas. The alapomorphas include the alapiformes, as well as the albuliformes, the anguilliformes, the sacopharyngiiformes. The anguilliformes is kind of a big one. That's got all of our eels in it, our true eels. And then we go from there into the astereoclupiomorpha, right? So the red ones are the ones we've already talked about, kind of our major names. The astereoclupiomorphas include the suborder Clupiomorpha, which has the Clupeiformes. The Astereophysi is our other superorder within the Astereoclupiomorpha. You can see where it gets its name, right? Astereo, Clupi. So sometimes the names make sense. The Astereophysi include the Cypriniformes, the Carassiformes, the Siluriformes, the Gymnotiformes, and that takes us to the Euteleostii. So the Euteleostii are like a whole bunch of other ones. We're not going to list their names here because there's so many, but that's our kind of our next big group. We'll start by working our way through these different major groups. We'll look at the extinct order, Pholidophoraformes first. It being an extinct fish, we don't know as much about it. We know that there were 5 families, so it was fairly diverse. It does have those ganoid scales, which are typical of our extinct fishes, those thicker, heavier scales. We do see that the uroneurals are well developed within this order, and they're found back in the Triassic-Jurassic, so Mesozoic era fishes. That leaves our 4 major groups of teleosts, our osteoglossomorphas, our alapomorphas, our astereoclupiomorphas, and our Euteleostii. So we'll look at each of those groups and kind of try to give you an overview, some of the major characteristics and some examples, so maybe it'll help you to figure out who these groups are a little bit more. So we'll start with the osteoglossomorpha. Osteo is bone, gloss is tongue, and morph is form. So these are the bony-tongued fishes. They're found mostly in tropical freshwater areas, and they have these unique bony characters in their mouth. The teeth in the lower portion of the hyoid arch resemble a bony tongue, and they'll use this tongue as an opposing surface for their teeth to actually chew against. So it's a very unique structure. They are considered to be a primitive group based on some of their skeletal elements. So here we see just some line drawings to give you some of the examples here. The elephant fish that kind of comes down here. We've got the osteoglossidaes with their kind of trapdoor mouth we'll look at in just a little bit. So the bite, as I said, is between the tongue and the roof of the mouth. The premaxilla is small and fixed to the skull, so we don't quite have that jaw mobility we see in our more derived teleosts. And the maxilla is still part of the gape at this point. A few examples of our osteoglossomorpha. We'll start with the osteoglossum. This is a 1-meter predatory fish found in the Amazon, the arowana, and you can see it has that nice little trapdoor mouth there, so it's kind of designed to get food off the surface, so if there's something floating on the water, it can just come up and kind of grab it. See those nice big large scales, which also indicate that we're dealing with a kind of a more ancestral species. The dorsal fin and the anal fin extend back, and they nearly merge with the caudal fin, but you can see that caudal fin is still back there, small and distinct. The one species is called the monkeyfish. I think it's this guy here, and it will actually jump out of the water to get the prey. It's been found even with bird remains in its stomach. Mostly it's going to feed on small fish and invertebrates, and like I said, things floating on the surface, but it will actually jump out to grab other food sources. And we also have the arapaima. So this is an Amazon predator. This one gets big, 3 meters, maybe even up to 4.5 meters, perhaps the largest strictly freshwater fish, maybe. It depends on who's measuring. You might see them on the River Monster show that they have on Animal Planet. And if you've ever been to the National Zoo up in Washington, D.C., and you go into the Amazon exhibit, there's a part there you walk into and they've got the spoonbills that kind of fly around, and there's these like low water tanks that they have, and there's these giant fish swimming in them. That's these guys. Those are the arapaimas. You can see those nice big thick heavy scales that they have on them. Again, we have the dorsal and the anal fin set way back, gives it that torpedo shape, suggesting that we have a fast accelerating predator. Those thick heavy scales, it can live in piranha waters without any problem at all, as do many other animals. It does have a labyrinth for air breathing. It has to surface. It's an obligate air breather. It has to surface to breathe air regularly, and that makes it vulnerable to spear fishing when it comes up to the surface. But now they're generally catch and release because people will pay lots of money to come and catch a great big giant fish like this. Also within the Osteoglossomorpha, we have some smaller ones that look a little different, like our Mormurus species here. African elephant fish, you can see there, it kind of has that elongated trunk-like part that makes us think of an elephant. 5 centimeters up to about 1.5 meters in size. They're a bottom feeder, and they have a weak electrical discharge. They have a really large cerebellum in their brain. It's actually comparable by size to what we have for humans. And the thought is it's just because it's specialized for this electrosensing. So that elongated snout is specialized for feeding in the muddy substrates and it's looking for those invertebrates that are down there. And it may also be that this weak electrical discharge that it produces is because it lives in the muddy water. So it's got the snout to pick up the signals from the invertebrates, but it's also got a weak discharge that is probably used more for communication in a muddy substrate, muddy environment than it is for killing prey or for defense. So that's our Osteoglossomorpha, our bony tongues, and we'll move on to the Elapomorphas. Now, the Elapomorpha name does not really help you at all because elap means a kind of fish and the morph is shape. So these are, they kind of have a fish shape, which really doesn't help too much. But what they do have are what's called leptocephalus larvae. So they all have these larvae with this small head, pointed head larva, and they're pretty transparent. So the larvae will drift around at the ocean surface until they're in the appropriate habitat, hopefully, and then that's where they'll settle out. So we have eel-like and marine species here, right? Our eels are in here, as well as our bone fishes and our tarpons. There's the tarpon in there. So a large variety of fishes here. Our first example of an Elapomorpha is the American eel, Anguilla rostrata. This is a catadromous species, so it will mature in freshwater and then migrate to the sea to breed. So what they'll do is they'll breed here like in the Sargasso Sea, and it's thought that they spawn at depth and then the adults die, and then the eggs and the larvae, right, remember the eggs they have that little oil glob there, so they're going to float. So they float to the surface, the larvae are up at the surface, and they just kind of float around. The Sargasso Sea has this current that moves around, so they kind of float as it moves them around. So the American ones are going to come off from our rivers, lay their eggs and die, and then the young are going to float around here. And when they come back towards the coast, that's when they get the signal that they need to change. They'll transform into a mini eel at that point, and then they'll ascend the rivers. They'll stay up in the rivers until they're mature adults, and that can be anywhere to up to 25 years maturing in the freshwater. And then they'll return to the sea and breed at depth again. And then the larva will move around and then come back up. So a little bit different lifestyle. The European eels, Anguilla, they're doing pretty much the same thing, except they're going to spawn in the northeast portion of the Sargasso Sea. So they're going to spawn here, probably at some kind of different depth than the American eels do, so that there's not any sort of issues. And then the larvae are going to ride the current, on this case, around until they can enter Northern Europe, Northern Africa, Mediterranean, the Black Sea, somewhere in there, and then go up into the rivers and live their life until they're ready to spawn, and then they'll come back down into the Sargasso Sea again. Also within the Elapomorphas, we have some things that have other kinds of fish shape. We have the bonefishes, a fast-swimming predator, shallow coastal, subtropical to tropical waters. They'll get up to maybe about 40 centimeters. They're air breathers as well. They have this downward facing snout like this. They're benthic feeder there. Typically, we find them in estuaries. They'll use that benthic snout there to kind of dig around in the bottom and find their various food invertebrates and crabs and things. And then we also have our tarpons, similar to the bonefishes, but a little bit different. Their mouth is on the end, so they're going to be carnivores, actively hunting prey down, swallow the prey whole, hunting at night. But you can see this is what they start as, right? So we all have that leptocephalus larva with that small pointed head there next to a dime. Gives you an idea of how small it is. Fast-swimming predator, again, the same waters that we saw the bonefish in, the coastal, subtropical, tropical waters. Females can get quite large, up to 2.5 meters long. They are obligate air breathers. They have a swim bladder, so that makes them vulnerable when they're smaller to birds and to us. They'll roll at the surface with that distinct silvery scales flashing in the sun. The meat has a lot of bones, so it's not really something people like to catch, but they do like the catch and release. It's a good fighting fish, so they'll go out to catch it, to fish for it, just to have the good fight, and then they will release it when they're done. But again, all of these fishes have that same larval stage, and you can see on these as well the big, thick, heavy scales, some of those more ancestral basal characters. So 2 groups down, Osteoglossomorpha, right? Bony tongue, osteo, bone, gloss, tongue. Elapomorpha, the fish-shaped ones, but those were our eels and our tarpons and bonefishes. And this takes us to our Ostereoclupeomorphas. So Ostereoclupeomorphas, suddenly we get a little bit bigger. We've got a lot of different groups in here. We've got our Clupeomorphas, which are our Clupeiformes, and then we have our Ostereophyses. So Clupeomorpha, Clupea is a small river fish, which doesn't really help us. These are, think of herring-like fishes are in here. Small, right? Herring. Ostereophyses. So ostereo is a small bone and physe is bladder. So remember back when we talked about hearing? We talked about that Weberian apparatus that fishes have that connect their bones, their hearing, little bones that connect their ears to their swim bladders to act as an amplifier. That's what we see here in this group. Our Clupeiformes, as I said, were our herrings, anchovies, sardines. Cypriniformes, these are things like our minnows, shiners, carps. Carassiformes, those are our piranhas. Tetras, if you've ever kept like the neon tetras as a fish, that's the group they're in. Siluriformes, those are our catfishes. And yes, our catfishes include everything from our big river catfishes to the smaller ones. So if you're someone who's worried about that little tiny fish that swims up your urethra in the Amazon, yeah, he's a catfish. He's a tiny parasitic species. What it wants to do is parasitize the gill cavities. So it's looking for an upcurrent where it's coming, the water's coming out of the gill. It wants to swim up, and sometimes it mistakes that for urethra. And the Gymnotiformes, those are our knife fishes as well as our electric eels, which are not true eels, but knife fishes. So we'll start by looking at the Clupeomorphas. So the Clupeomorphas have an autophysic connection. And this is where the auto, right, the ear connects back. So this is our Weberian apparatus that we're talking about. The idea that your inner ears have are connected to your swim bladder back here, and then that your swim bladder can amplify the sound that you're hearing. They also have a recessus laterus, and that is just these various sensory canals that we have here, and they merge within a chamber in the otic region of the skull. We only see it in this group, and we think it has to do with how they kind of sense their environment and how they can pick up the cues for what's going on. And they don't have a lateral line on their body. If it's present, it's very reduced and it's hard to see. So it can be a good character to help you know that you're getting the right group that you're looking at in lab when you look at the fish and you see that the lateral line is absent. This one also shows kind of that recessus lateralis here as well as up there with the kind of the sensory canals. The Clupeomorpha are specialized for plankton feeding. There are large schools of our silvery fishes. Some species are anadromous. We've got this many species. There's a big variety in there. And again, these are small silvery fish. Herrings, sardines, anchovies are in here. And our other group that makes up the Asterioclupeomorphas are the Asteriophyses. This is a really diverse group, over 6,000 species, over about 64% of our freshwater species. I've heard the number go as high as 80%, and it can be upwards to a quarter of all of our living fishes fall into this group. It includes our characians, those are our piranhas, our neon tetras. It includes our carps, our minnows, our catfishes, and our electric knife fishes. This here is a carp, an Asian carp. It's an invasive species in the Great Lakes. It has spread through the Great Lakes and causes problems. It can grow to be quite large, as you can see from the picture there. And is considered to be a problem, and people try to remove it if they can. So Asteriophyses, you can see here, we got a variety just from the drawings. The pictures here of the different shapes that we have, the different sizes, everything from our catfishes to our more eel-like knife fish forms. And we do have some distinct characters within this group. They have that Weberian apparatus. So this is where we have the actual bones that connect from the swim bladder to the ear right here in the middle. We've got our ears here, right, with our labyrinth. And we've got the gas bladder, and those are the bones that connect them, again, allowing them to hear a little bit better. They produce what's called Schreckstoff. So Schreckstoff is basically an alarm substance that is released when the scales are ruptured. So if an individual has been attacked or eaten or bitten, then its scales are going to release this scent into the water column, and then the other fish can react. In some cases, they'll school up really tight. In other cases, they may leave the area, but it kind of allows them to sense it. And they can even do this across species. Now, when they've studied it, they realized that there can be, for some species, a more seasonal time that they use this. During breeding season, a lot of the species will stop producing it, because if you are a male and you're courting females and you happen to rub your scales on a hard substrate and they release this Schreckstoff, then instead of wooing the females, they're going to run away from you because they think something is attacking you. And so they kind of change their ability to produce this during the breeding season for some of the species. They also have what are unculi, which are these horny projections that come from single cells. And the thought is they may help them for clinging and scraping. They're found on lips and ventral surfaces, and they're small. They're different from the breeding tubercles, which you can see here on this guy here, these kind of larger bumps that are there. And they're not really sure what they do either. It may help the spawning pairs like be able to maintain contact and know where the other one is. It may have something to do with helping the female to stimulate the female so that she'll spawn. They are induced by testosterone, but they're really not clear what they do. And we do see now that the premaxilla is starting to become much more mobile. It's protractile in these fishes. Pelvic fins, if they're present, are going to be abdominal. So you can see those here on the fishes, right, where the pelvic fins are, more in the center of the fish if they're present. And this takes us to our last group. So we've made it through the Osteoglossomorpha with the bony tongue, the Elapomorpha, the kind of, those are the elongate ones you can think of as being our eels, our bonefishes, and tarpons, and the Asterioclupeomorphas, which are a very diverse group of fishes, including everything from our minnows and our piranhas to our catfishes. And this takes us to our last major group of teleosts, our Euteleostii. Euteleostii are really not very well defined. So they are all of these groups here, lots of fishes, over 22,000 species, 391 families. And this includes some really speciose families like the Gobiidae, so the gobies, the labridae, the cichlidae, the cichlids, so many cichlids. They keep discovering new ones. 8 superorders, 3 series, 29 orders that you have to learn in lab. In fact, there are so many of these, they're going to get their own lecture. We'll put them in for the next one, and we'll wrap this one up here. So today we started looking at our major lineages of teleosts. We have our 5 major groups here, And we looked briefly at the extinct phyllidiforiformes. We talked a bit about the osteoglossomorpha, the elapomorphas, and the autocephalomorphas, though we called them the ostereoclupeomorphas. And we got an idea of some of the diversity that we have there. We started to see maybe some of the structures change. Maybe we know a few examples now, so we're getting a little more familiar with the major groups. The Teleostii are too big to include in this lecture, and they'll get their own in the next one. But as you're reviewing the information presented today about 4 of the 5 major lineages of teleosts, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.